The message came at 11:47 p.m., a short vibration on a phone that rarely received anything except business orders and death threats. But this one was different. It was from an unknown number, a woman's number. "Please help me. He's going to kill me tonight. I don't know who else to text." This was the first number I found. The Mafia boss, Dominic Castellano, stared at the screen. He frowned at first, thinking it was a mistake, a scam, a wrong number. Then another text arrived, shorter, shakier. "I'm locked in the bathroom. He's breaking down the door. I can hear him screaming." Dominic's breath stilled. He had seen fear. He had caused fear. But he had never seen this. A woman begging a stranger because she had no one else left. He typed only 3 words. "I'm coming." No hesitation, no questions, no second thoughts. His men froze as he stood up in the middle of a $1 million negotiation, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the door. "Boss, we're in the middle of... This meeting is over." He didn't explain. He didn't need to, because something in that woman's words, that trembling desperation, hit a part of him he thought had died 15 years ago. As his car tore through the streets of Chicago, another message appeared. "He has a gun. He says if he can't have me, no one will." Dominic pressed harder on the accelerator. His knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. Street lights streaked past like golden bullets. He grabbed his phone with one hand, typing while steering with the other. "What's your name?" "Olivia. Olivia Harper." "Olivia, my name is Dom. I'm 10 minutes away. Can you barricade the door?" I pushed the cabinet against it. "But it won't hold long. Stay with me. Keep texting." Then came the message that made his heart stop. "If I don't make it, please tell my mom I love her. She's at Sunrise Care Home. Linda Harper. She has Alzheimer's, but sometimes she remembers me." Dominic felt something crack inside his chest. This woman, hiding in terror, was thinking about her mother. She was making peace with dying. "You're going to tell her yourself," he typed back. "Stay with me, Olivia." 2 minutes of silence. No response. He called the number. No answer. His pulse hammered against his temples. Then one final message appeared. He broke through. "I'm hiding in the closet now. I can hear him loading the gun. Thank you for answering. Even if you don't make it in time. Thank you for not ignoring me." Dominic recognized that tone immediately. It was the sound of someone giving up, of a woman preparing to die alone in a closet, while a stranger raced through the night to save her. "No," he said aloud to his empty car. "Not tonight. Not again." 15 years ago, he had received a similar call, from his sister Sophia. She had been trapped with a violent boyfriend. She had begged him to come. He had driven as fast as he could. But he arrived 20 minutes too late. By the time he reached the address tonight, Dominic already knew. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as a mafia boss. He was arriving as the only hope this woman had left, and he would burn down the entire city before he let history repeat itself. What he found inside that apartment changed everything, and the man he discovered hurting her, that man was about to learn why Dominic Castellano's name made grown men weep. If you are listening to this and feel that the story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from, and leave a comment below so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us. Dominic did not knock. He did not need to. A single kick from his expensive Italian leather shoes and the rotting wooden door burst free from its hinges, slamming into the wall with a thunderous crash that echoed through the dark hallway. The smell of blood hit his nostrils before his eyes could adjust to the darkness. It was a scent Dominic had grown all too familiar with over the past 15 years. That sharp, metallic tang of iron and salt, of pain and despair. But tonight, that smell made his stomach clench in an entirely different way. Apartment 4B looked as though a storm had torn through it. Furniture lay overturned. Shattered glass scattered across the floor like fallen stars. A standing lamp lay tilted on its side, its bulb still flickering with a faint, sickly yellow glow. On the wall, a streak of blood trailed from the living room down the hallway leading to the bedroom, as if someone had been dragged across the floor. Dominic felt his jaw clench so tight his teeth might shatter. He moved like a shadow, each footstep light and precise, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. And the truth was, he had. The only difference was that in the past, he had been the hunter. But tonight, he was here to save the prey from the claws of another beast. A scream echoed from the bedroom. A man's voice, drunk, filled with crazed fury, and another voice, weaker, choked with tears, pleading. Dominic pushed the bedroom door wide open, and his world stopped for a single moment. Marcus Webb stood in the middle of the room, one hand gripping a fistful of the woman's long brown hair, dragging her out of the wardrobe as if she were nothing more than a torn rag doll. His other hand held a pistol, the barrel pressed directly against her temple, and for the first time, Dominic laid eyes on Olivia Harper. She was smaller than he had imagined. Her brown hair tangled and matted with blood on one side, her face bruised, a large swelling on her left cheekbone, her lower lip split in a long gash, still oozing blood. Her white blouse had been torn at the shoulder, revealing old bruises faded to a sickly yellow-green, mingled with fresh ones turning deep purple. She looked like a flower crushed by a storm, battered, broken, but her eyes were not. Those green eyes, though brimming with tears and fear, still burned with a flame that Dominic recognized instantly. It was the will to live. It was the refusal to surrender. It was the same light that Sophia once had in her eyes, before it was extinguished forever. In that moment, Dominic no longer saw the room before him. He saw Tyler Morrison's apartment from 15 years ago. He saw his sister lying on the floor, blood flowing from the wound in her chest, her eyes already robbed of their light. He saw everything he had lost because he arrived too late. But tonight, he was not late. Tonight, he stood right here, and this woman was still breathing. Marcus spun around, the gun now aimed directly at Dominic's chest. His eyes were bloodshot from alcohol and madness. His hand trembled, but his finger remained on the trigger. He was a tall man, perhaps once handsome, before liquor and violence had twisted him into the monster standing before Dominic now. A successful lawyer, as Dominic would later discover. A man society would call accomplished. But in this room, he was nothing more than a beast pointing a gun at a defenseless woman. "Who the fuck are you?" Marcus snarled, his voice slurred from drink yet still sober enough to know fear. Because there was something in the way Dominic stood at that doorway, calm and cold as death itself come knocking. Something that made Marcus realize this man was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Not a cop, not a neighbor, not some hero trying to play brave. This was a predator, and for the first time tonight, Marcus Webb felt he was no longer the one in control. Dominic did not answer. He did not need to. His silence was more terrifying than any threat Marcus had ever heard in his life. He simply stood there at the threshold of the bedroom, arms hanging loosely at his sides, his gray eyes cold as frozen steel. No panic, no hesitation, only an absolute calm that made the air in the room thicken like the stillness before a storm. "I asked you a fucking question," Marcus screamed, spittle flying from the corners of his mouth, the gun barrel shaking in his grip. He pulled Olivia closer against him, using her as a shield, his finger tightening on the trigger. "One more step and I'll blow her brains out. I swear to God I'll do it." Dominic tilted his head slightly to one side, as though observing a particularly interesting insect. Then he stepped forward. One step. Slow, deliberate. "What the hell are you doing?" I said. "Stop." Marcus shrieked, his voice now carrying that panicked pitch Dominic had heard too many times in his life. It was the sound of a man realizing he had lost control of the situation. It was the sound of prey recognizing it faced a true predator. Dominic took another step. "You want to shoot her?" He finally spoke, his voice low and steady as a funeral bell. "Then shoot. But after that, you'll have to shoot me, and Marcus." He paused, letting the name hang in the air like a death sentence. "I don't think you have enough bullets for what comes next." Marcus blinked. The mention of his name stopped him cold. He had never told this man his name, so how did he know? Inside his head, the pieces began falling into place, and the picture they formed turned the blood in his veins to ice. This man had not wandered in by chance. This man knew who he was. This man had come here with a purpose. "Who sent you?" Marcus asked, his voice beginning to tremble. "Did the Volkovs send you? I can pay. Whatever they're paying you, I can double it." Dominic did not respond. He simply kept walking forward, one step at a time, as though the gun in Marcus's hand was nothing but a child's toy. The distance between them shrank. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps. "I'm warning you!" Marcus screamed, and then he pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the small room like thunder, deafening and violent. Olivia screamed and curled into herself, but Dominic did not flinch. The bullet grazed past his left shoulder, tearing through the fabric of his expensive suit jacket before embedding itself in the wall behind him. Marcus had missed, because his hand shook too violently, because the alcohol had blurred his vision, because somewhere deep in his subconscious, he knew that hitting this man would not save him. It would only make his death more painful. And in that moment of stunned disbelief at his missed shot, Dominic moved. He moved so fast the naked eye could barely follow. 2 seconds. That was all he needed. His left hand seized Marcus's wrist and twisted it sharply at a 90-degree angle. The sound of cracking bone rang out alongside Marcus's agonized scream. The gun clattered to the floor with a dry, hollow thud. Dominic's right hand grabbed Marcus by the collar and hurled him into the wall as though he were nothing but a punching bag in a gym. Marcus's back slammed into the brick with a sickening thud, hard enough to rattle the framed pictures hanging there. Before Marcus could slide to the floor, Dominic's hand had already closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. "You like hitting women, Marcus?" Dominic asked, his voice still terrifyingly calm, as though he were asking about the weather rather than choking the life out of a human being. "You like making them feel small? Helpless? Terrified?" Marcus tried to say something, but all that escaped were desperate, gurgling gasps. His face began turning a deep purplish red. Veins bulged across his forehead like worms trying to claw their way out. Dominic could kill him right now. Just a little more pressure, just a few more seconds, and Marcus Webb would become a corpse. No one would know. No one would care. The world would simply be rid of one more monster. And Dominic had done this so many times that it would be as easy as breathing. But then he heard a sound. Ragged, broken breathing. A small, choked sob. Dominic turned his head and saw Olivia. She sat huddled on the floor, her back pressed against the wardrobe, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. Her green eyes stared directly at him, at his hand squeezing Marcus's throat, at the scene of violence unfolding before her, and in those eyes, Dominic saw fear. Not fear of Marcus, fear of him, fear of the monster he was becoming right before her eyes. That look in her eyes saved Marcus Webb's life. Dominic gazed into those trembling green eyes of Olivia and realized that if he killed Marcus right now, right in front of her, he would be no different from the man he had just saved her from. He would simply be another monster in the long chain of monsters that had passed through this woman's life, and that, for a reason Dominic did not fully understand, was something he could not bear. He released his grip. Marcus dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, choking and gasping for air, both hands clutching at a throat now marked with the red imprint of fingers. He tried to crawl away from Dominic, his back pressing against the wall, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at the man standing over him like a god of vengeance who had just decided to delay the sentence. Dominic slowly crouched down, bringing his face close enough to Marcus that the man could feel the cold breath against his skin. And then he spoke, in a whisper far more terrifying than any scream. "Listen to me very carefully, Marcus. I'm only going to say this once." Marcus nodded frantically, tears and snot streaming down a face that had once been considered handsome. All his arrogance, all his aggression had melted away like morning dew before the sun. Now he was nothing but a coward trembling at the feet of someone stronger. And Dominic knew this was the true face of men like him. Brave when facing women, cowardly when facing men. "Look at your watch, Marcus." Dominic spoke, each word clear and sharp as a blade cutting into flesh. "You have exactly 24 hours. That is the only mercy you will ever get from me. I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. But at 24 hours and 1 minute, if you are still in my city, the hunt begins. They will never find your body. Not a bone, not a tooth, not a single strand of hair. You will simply cease to exist." He paused, letting those words sink into Marcus's panicked mind. "And if you ever think about coming back for her, if you ever think about sending someone else to hurt her, if I even hear that you've spoken her name to another living soul, I will find you. It doesn't matter if you run to the other side of the world. It doesn't matter if you hide in a hole in the ground. I will find you, Marcus. And what I do to you will make tonight look like a gentle conversation between friends." Marcus opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to make promises. But Dominic had already risen and turned his back on him. "Get out." Those 2 words rang out like a gunshot, carrying a command that could not be refused. Marcus did not need to be told twice. He crawled toward the door, his broken wrist dangling at a grotesque angle, his legs stumbling as though he had forgotten how to walk. He did not dare look back at Olivia. He did not dare look back at the man who had spared his life. He simply crawled, ran, dragged himself out of the apartment, out of the 4th floor, out of the building, and vanished into the Chicago night like a cockroach fleeing from light. The sound of his stumbling footsteps grew distant, fainter and fainter, until the apartment sank into complete silence. Dominic stood motionless in the middle of the ruined living room, his back turned to Olivia. He did not turn around to look at her. He could not. Not yet, because if he turned around now, she would see what he was trying to hide. His hands were shaking, not from fear. Dominic Castellano had forgotten what fear felt like 15 years ago. No, his hands were shaking because the rage that had not been released was roaring inside his chest like a caged beast. He wanted to kill Marcus. God, how badly he wanted to kill him. He wanted to squeeze that throat until the light faded from those cowardly eyes. He wanted to make him pay for every bruise on Olivia's body, for every tear she had shed, for every night she had lain awake in terror. But he had not done it. And that, strangely enough, left him feeling both relieved and hollow. Dominic closed his eyes, drew in a deep breath, and tried to restrain the monster within. He had lived 15 years as a man with nothing left to lose. He had killed without hesitation, had destroyed lives without a shred of remorse. But tonight, he had chosen mercy. Not for Marcus, but for Olivia. For the woman sitting trembling in the corner of the bedroom, the one who had sent a message to a stranger's phone number with the fragile hope that someone, anyone, would come to save her. He did not want her to remember this night as the night she witnessed a murder. He wanted her to remember it as the night someone finally came. At last, Dominic turned around. Olivia still sat huddled in the corner of the bedroom, exactly where he had last seen her. Her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her tangled brown hair partially hid her face, but Dominic could still see her eyes watching him through the blood-matted strands. Those eyes no longer held the fear she had shown when she watched him choking Marcus. Now, there was only confusion, exhaustion, and something that looked like disbelief. Dominic moved closer, each step slow and careful, as though approaching a wounded bird that might take flight at any moment. He stopped a few paces away from her, then slowly lowered himself to the floor, bringing himself to her eye level, rather than looming above her like another threat. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was only the sound of Olivia's ragged breathing and the night wind blowing through the shattered window. Then finally, her voice emerged, hoarse and trembling, yet still carrying a note of genuine astonishment. "You actually came." 3 simple words. But the way she spoke them made Dominic's chest tighten. She said it as though someone coming to save her was the most impossible thing in the world. She said it as though she had grown accustomed to being abandoned, ignored, left alone in the darkness with her monsters. "I said I would," Dominic replied, his voice far gentler than it had been minutes ago, when he had been whispering threats into Marcus's ear. Olivia looked at him a moment longer, as though trying to determine whether he was real or merely a hallucination born of trauma. Then, so suddenly that neither of them could have anticipated it, tears began streaming down her cheeks. Not sobbing, not screaming, just silent tears, falling like rain down a face covered in bruises. And somehow, that silence was more heartbreaking than any cry could have been. Dominic pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. He dialed quickly, lifting it to his ear. It rang 3 times before someone answered. "Dom, it's past midnight. What's wrong?" The voice of Dr. Rachel Chen came through, slightly groggy but instantly alert at the sound of his name. 15 years as Dominic Castellano's personal physician had taught her that midnight calls were never trivial matters. "I need you. 1847 Maple Street, apartment 4B. A woman, late 20s, head trauma, possible broken ribs, multiple bruises, old and new. I'm on my way." 20 minutes. Make it 15. Dominic hung up without another word. He knew Rachel would come. She always did. That was why he paid her 10 times what any other doctor in the city earned. He stood and looked around the ruined apartment, the bathroom. He needed to find the bathroom. He stepped through the debris, found a clean towel in the cabinet, and turned on the warm water. He dipped the towel, wrung it gently, then returned to the bedroom. Olivia still sat in the same spot, but her eyes had followed his every movement. Dominic knelt before her, lifting the warm towel close to her face but not touching her. "May I?" he asked, his voice soft as a breath. Olivia hesitated for a second, then nodded. Dominic's hand moved slowly, gently pressing the warm towel against the bleeding wound on her forehead. She flinched when the fabric touched her skin but did not pull away. He wiped the dried blood from her cheekbones, around the gash on her lip, along her jawline. Each motion was so slow and careful it bordered on tender. These were the hands that had once choked the life out of men. These were the hands that had pulled triggers without hesitation. These were the hands that had built an entire criminal empire on the blood and tears of enemies. But now, they touched Olivia's face as though she were made of crystal, as though the slightest pressure might shatter her completely. Why? Olivia whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and screaming. Why did you come? You don't know me. I'm nobody to you. Dominic paused, the towel still resting against her cheek. The question should have been simple to answer. He could say it was the right thing to do. He could say he happened to be nearby. He could say anything to fill the silence and continue the night as a kind stranger who happened to save someone. But when he looked into those green eyes gazing back at him with such heartbreaking sincerity, he found he could not lie. Because someone I loved once needed help like you. He finally answered, his voice dropping low, as though each word was being pulled from somewhere deep within his chest. And no one came for her. Olivia did not ask more. She did not need to, because she could see the pain in his gray eyes, a pain that had cooled to ash but had never truly gone out. She realized that the man kneeling before her had not come only to save her. He had come to save someone he had failed to save a very long time ago. 14 minutes later, a knock sounded at the door. Dominic rose from where he had been sitting beside Olivia on the floor and went to open it. Doctor. Rachel Chen stood at the threshold with a black medical bag in her hand, her dark hair hastily pinned up and her sharp eyes sweeping across the ruined apartment. She was a Chinese-American woman in her mid-40s, petite but radiating a quiet authority that only those who have seen too much ever possess. 15 years as Dominic Castellano's personal physician had taught her to stitch wounds on killers, to close her eyes to questions better left unasked, and to refrain from judging the work of the man standing before her. But when she saw Olivia huddled in the corner of the bedroom, something in her gaze shifted. This was not some mafioso shot in a territorial war. This was a young woman, battered and broken, looking back at her with the eyes of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Rachel said nothing. She simply stepped past Dominic, set her medical bag on the floor, and knelt before Olivia with a smile surprisingly gentle. Hello, sweetheart. My name is Rachel. I'm a doctor. I'm here to help you. Is that okay? Olivia glanced toward Dominic as though asking permission, and only when he gave a slight nod did she turn back to Rachel and nod her consent. The examination proceeded in near-complete silence. Rachel worked with the professionalism and tenderness that only the finest physicians possess, checking each wound, each bruise, each swelling on Olivia's body. She shone a small flashlight into her eyes, testing the pupillary reflex. She pressed gently on the ribs and felt Olivia flinch with pain. She rolled up the sleeves of her shirt and saw old bruises faded to yellow-green layered between fresh ones turning deep purple. Dominic stood in the corner of the room, watching everything. Each time Rachel discovered another wound, his jaw clenched a little tighter. Each time Olivia flinched in pain, his hands curled into fists. He had witnessed violence. He had inflicted violence. But seeing the evidence of abuse spanning months, perhaps years, written across this woman's body, he felt something boiling in his chest that he could not name. After about 20 minutes, Rachel stood and stepped out of the bedroom, motioning for Dominic to follow. They stood in the hallway, far enough that Olivia could not hear but close enough that Dominic could still see her through the doorway. Mild concussion, Rachel began, her voice low and serious, her fingers tracing the dark bruise blooming across Olivia's side. But it's the ribs I'm worried about. 2 fractures on the left side. Every breath she takes right now feels like inhaling broken glass. If she exerts herself, even a little, she risks puncturing a lung. She creates any strain, Dom, and she'll be back in the hospital. She paused, her dark eyes looking directly into Dominic's. How long has he been hurting her, Dom? Dominic did not answer right away. He looked toward Olivia, at the way she sat, curled into herself as though trying to make herself small enough to become invisible, at the old and new wounds layered across her pale skin. And he remembered Sophia. He remembered the times his sister had visited wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer. He remembered the forced smiles and the clumsy lies. He remembered all the signs he had seen but had not acted on quickly enough. Too long, he finally answered, his voice rough. Far too long, Rachel sighed. She needs rest, at least a week of bed rest for the ribs to start healing. And Dom. She placed her hand on his arm, a rare gesture of intimacy between them. She shouldn't be alone, not tonight, not for a while. Whoever did this to her, if he comes back, he won't. Dominic cut in, his voice cold as ice. I made sure of that. Rachel did not ask further. She knew better than to ask. She needs someone to watch over her. Does she have family? Friends? Dominic turned to look at Olivia. He remembered the message she had sent in her desperation. Her mother was in a nursing home. She had Alzheimer's. And Olivia had texted a complete stranger's phone number because she had no one else to call. He stepped back into the bedroom and knelt before Olivia once more. "Olivia," he called her name softly. "Do you have anyone we can call? Family? Friends? Anyone who can take care of you?" Olivia looked up at him, and in those green eyes, Dominic saw a loneliness so deep it made even his frozen heart ache. "My mom is at Sunrise Care Home. She has Alzheimer's. Most days she doesn't even remember my name." She paused, swallowing hard. "And my friends. Marcus, he didn't like me having friends. He said they were bad influences. One by one, they all stopped calling. I haven't talked to anyone in over a year." She lowered her head, hiding her face behind her tangled hair. "I don't have anyone. That's why I texted a random number tonight, because I literally had no one else." Dominic was silent for a long moment. He thought of his empty penthouse at the top of the city. He thought of 15 years living alone amid wealth and power, yet lonely to the bone. He thought of Sophia, of promises unkept, of all the nights he had wondered whether his life held any meaning beyond accumulating money and power. And then he made a decision. Not after careful deliberation, not after weighing the consequences. The decision came to him as naturally as breathing, as though it were the only right thing he could do. "You're coming with me." The black Mercedes glided smoothly through the Chicago streets at night, streetlights flickering like falling stars across the windshield. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, her eyes closed from exhaustion. The painkillers Dr. Rachel Chen had injected were beginning to take effect, pulling her into a dreamless sleep after the real nightmare she had just endured. Dominic drove in silence, his gray eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was somewhere far away. 15 years ago, East Los Angeles. A world entirely different from the penthouses and million-dollar meetings of the present. A world he had tried to bury but could never truly forget. Back then, he was not Dominic Castellano. He was Daniel Rivera, a 21-year-old young man with hands calloused from labor and a heart that still knew how to love. He lived in a cramped apartment in East Los Angeles with his mother and sister, where ambulance sirens were, the constant soundtrack, and the smell of food from Mexican restaurants mingled with exhaust fumes and street dust. The apartment had only 2 bedrooms, walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing, and a heating system that worked only when it felt like it. But it was home. It was where his mother lived, Elena Rivera, a small woman with hands roughened from too much work, yet who still found a way to cook dinner for her children every day. She worked 3 jobs at once. In the morning, she worked at a garment factory on the outskirts of the city. In the afternoon, she cleaned offices for a law firm downtown. In the evening, she washed dishes at a Mexican restaurant 4 bus stops from home. She slept an average of 4 hours each night, and Daniel had never once heard her complain. "I do everything for you, children," she would often say whenever Daniel tried to convince her to rest. "When you succeed, then I will rest." And then there was Sophia, his little sister, the light of the whole family. Sophia Rivera, 19 years old, with long, silky black hair and a smile that could melt even the coldest California winter days. She was astonishingly intelligent, had been at the top of her class since elementary school, and had just received a full scholarship to UCLA. She was the first in the Rivera family ever to set foot in a university. She was the hope, the future, the living proof that all of their mother's sleepless nights and exhausting workdays had not been in vain. Daniel remembered the day Sophia received her acceptance letter from UCLA. She had run into the apartment, envelope in hand, her eyes blazing like 1,000 stars. "Danny, Mom, I got into UCLA," their mother had cried. It was the first time Daniel had ever seen her cry from happiness rather than exhaustion. She held Sophia tight, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, whispering words of gratitude in Spanish that Daniel could not quite hear clearly. And he had stood in the corner of the room, smiling like a fool, feeling his chest swell with pride. His sister would escape this place. His sister would become somebody. His sister would have a life their family had never dared to dream of. Sophia's first year of college was a wonderful one. She earned high marks in all her classes, made new friends, and came home every weekend with exciting stories about campus life. Then she met Tyler Morrison. Daniel still remembered the first time Sophia mentioned that name. They were having dinner in the small kitchen, their mother just home from her night shift, and Sophia could not stop talking about the third-year law student she had met in the library. "Tyler Morrison, Danny. He's so handsome. His family lives in Beverly Hills. His father is a partner at one of the biggest law firms in Los Angeles, and he wants to date me," she laughed, her eyes sparkling like crystal. "I can't believe it. Someone like him actually likes someone like me." Daniel had been happy for her, genuinely happy. He thought this was a wonderful opportunity for his sister, Tyler Morrison came from a world of wealth and privilege, a world the Rivera family could only glimpse from afar through television screens. If Sophia married him, she would never have to worry about money again. She would have everything that life had denied their mother. But then things began to change. Slowly. So subtly that Daniel barely noticed until it was too late. Sophia started wearing long sleeves even on the hottest California summer days. She smiled less. She came home less often. And when she did, her eyes no longer sparkled the way they once had. Instead, every time her phone rang, Daniel watched his sister flinch, as though she had heard a gunshot. She would look at the screen with an expression he could not name, then excuse herself and disappear into the bathroom to answer. When she returned, the smile on her lips looked like a mask hastily put on, hiding something Daniel did not want to think about. "Sophia? Is everything okay?" he had asked many times. "I'm fine, Danny," she always answered the same way. "It's just academic pressure. Tyler is helping me so much. He loves me so much." And Daniel had believed her, because he wanted to believe, because the truth was too painful to face, because admitting something was wrong meant having to act, and he did not know how to act against a man whose family's money and power could crush the Riveras like an ant. The fateful night came on a Thursday in November, when the first cold winds of winter began to blow through Los Angeles. Daniel was working the night shift at a food packaging plant on the outskirts of the city, where he had worked for the past 3 years to help his mother cover living expenses. The work was hard and monotonous, standing for 8 hours straight beside the production line, but he never complained. Every dollar he earned was a small brick building Sophia's future, and that was enough to keep him going. The clock showed 2:17 in the morning when the phone in his pocket vibrated. Daniel almost did not hear it over the thundering machinery around him, but something made him reach into his pocket and look at the screen. Sophia's name appeared. His sister had never called at this hour. Never. Daniel's heart clenched as he pressed the answer button. "Sophia, are you okay?" Silence. Then a whispered voice, trembling, choked with tears, came through the line. "Danny, save me, please." Daniel felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. "Sophia, where are you? What happened?" "Tyler. He's drunk. He's gone crazy, Danny. He has a gun." The sound of sobbing, choking on tears, the thunderous pounding on a door echoing in the background. The voice of a man screaming threats that Daniel could not make out clearly but were enough to make him want to vomit. "I'm at Tyler's apartment, 12th floor. Danny, I'm so scared. Please come, please." "I'm coming, Sophia. I'm coming right now. Do you hear me? Hide. Lock the bathroom door. Don't open it for anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hurry, Danny. Please hurry. I love you." The line went dead. Daniel did not remember how he ran out of the factory. He did not remember what he screamed at the supervisor when the man tried to stop him. He only remembered his legs running across the parking lot, jumping into the old Honda Civic he had bought with 3 years of savings, and flooring the gas as though his own life was being threatened. Because it was. Sophia's life was his life. If she died, he would die with her. Tyler's apartment was in Beverly Hills, about 35 minutes by car if traffic was clear. But that night, fate decided to play a cruel game with Daniel Rivera. An accident on Interstate 10. 3 cars had collided, blocking nearly all the lanes. Police lights flashed red and blue like the eyes of demons laughing at him. Traffic came to a complete standstill. Daniel honked his horn. He screamed through the window. He punched the steering wheel until his hands bled. But the cars in front of him did not move. They stood still as stones, indifferent to the desperation of a brother trying to save his sister. 45 minutes. 45 minutes of hell that Daniel was trapped on the highway, while somewhere in the city, Sophia was facing the monster alone. He tried calling her back. No one answered. He called the police, but they said they needed time to verify the address. He called the building, but security said they could not interfere in residents' private matters. 45 minutes. 2,700 seconds. Each second that passed was a knife plunged into Daniel's heart. When he finally reached the luxury high-rise in Beverly Hills, he knew immediately it was too late. Police cars were parked everywhere. An ambulance with lights still flashing but no siren. A crowd gathered in the lobby, whispering to one another in voices filled with fear and morbid curiosity. And on the sidewalk in front of the building, 2 black body bags lay side by side like a final, cruel farewell. Daniel leapt from the car without bothering to turn off the engine or close the door. He ran toward the body bags, but a police officer stopped him. "Sir, you can't go there. This is a crime scene." "That's my sister!" Daniel screamed, his voice shattering into jagged pieces. "Sophia Rivera! That's my sister in there. The officer looked at him with eyes Daniel would never forget. It was a look of pity, of helplessness, of someone who had seen too many tragedies to feel anything anymore except exhaustion. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer said, his voice flat as a machine. "She didn't make it. The boyfriend shot her twice before turning the gun on himself. By the time we got here, they were both gone." Daniel did not remember how he collapsed to the ground. He did not remember how he screamed. He only remembered the feeling of someone reaching into his chest and ripping out his heart, leaving behind a black hole, empty and cold. Sophia, his baby sister, the child he had held in his arms when she was born, the little girl he had taught to ride a bicycle, had helped with homework, had promised to protect at all costs. She had lain there, in that cold black body bag, and he had not arrived in time. 45 minutes. If he had been faster by 45 minutes. If not for that damned accident. If he had acted sooner when he saw the signs. If. Those ifs would haunt Daniel Rivera for the rest of his life. Their mother did not survive the shock. Elena Rivera, the resilient woman who had worked 3 jobs at once without ever complaining, collapsed completely after her daughter's death. Her heart, already weakened by years of overwork, stopped beating 2 years later. She passed away in her sleep, and Daniel always wondered whether she had died of illness or simply because she no longer had a reason to live. After his mother's funeral, Daniel Rivera stood before the graves of Sophia and Elena in the small cemetery in East Los Angeles. He stood there for hours, in the cold February rain, and let the last part of his old self die. Daniel Rivera, the 21-year-old young man with a loving heart and hands calloused from honest labor, had died on that fateful night alongside Sophia. From the ashes of pain and hatred, a different man had risen. Dominic Castellano, cold, ruthless, with nothing left to lose. The Mercedes pulled into the private parking garage of the tallest building in Chicago. Dominic turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, letting the memories of Sophia and his mother slowly sink to the bottom of his mind, where he had kept them locked away for 15 years. Then he turned to look at Olivia. She had awakened at some point, her green eyes wide open, looking around with the confusion of someone who did not know where she was or why she was here. "We're here," Dominic said gently. "Can you walk?" Olivia nodded, though her body still ached from the wounds Marcus had left behind. Dominic stepped out of the car and walked around to her side, opening the door and offering his hand. She hesitated for a second, before placing her small hand in his palm, letting him help her out of the car. They entered a private elevator, the kind that stopped at only one floor and required a special keycard to activate. Dominic swiped the card, and the cabin began its silent ascent. 52 floors. Olivia watched the numbers flash on the control panel and felt her ears pop from the rapid change in altitude. When the elevator doors opened, she had to catch her breath. Dominic Castellano's penthouse spread before her eyes like another world. Soaring ceilings with floor-to-ceiling glass walls looked out over all of Chicago at night, millions of lights twinkling like a carpet of stars. The floor was polished black marble reflecting the glow from crystal chandeliers suspended high above. The furniture was minimalist but expensive. Gray charcoal leather sofas, glass tables with stainless steel legs, walnut bookshelves running along one wall. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. Everything was so cold it made Olivia want to shiver. Because amid all that luxury, there was not a single photograph, not a single memento, not a single sign that this was the home of a human being with memories, with feelings, with connections to the outside world. This penthouse looked more like a showroom in an architecture magazine than a place to live. Beautiful, perfect, and utterly soulless. "You live here alone?" Olivia asked, her voice echoing in the vast space before being swallowed by the silence. Dominic stepped inside, removed his jacket, and draped it over the back of the sofa. He did not look at her when he answered, his eyes gazing out the glass windows toward the city lights flickering far below. "I don't really live," he said, his voice flat as though stating an obvious truth. "I just exist." Olivia did not know how to respond. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around herself from cold and confusion, not knowing what she should do or say in this unfamiliar space. She was an elementary school teacher with a modest salary, living in a small apartment in the suburbs. She had never set foot in a place like this, had never imagined she would be standing in the penthouse of a man she had met less than 2 hours ago, a man who had saved her life but about whom she knew nothing except the name Dom and the fact that he could make someone like Marcus Webb tremble like a child. As if reading her confusion, Dominic turned and said, "Come, I'll show you your room." He led her through a long hallway with expensive abstract paintings hung on the walls, to a door at the end. He opened it and turned on the light, revealing a spacious bedroom with a king-size bed, pristine white sheets, and a large window overlooking Lake Michigan. "This is your room for as long as you need it," Dominic said. Then he pointed to the lock on the door. "There's a lock on the inside. You can lock it whenever you want. No one enters if you don't want." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "Especially me." Olivia looked at the lock, then at Dominic. This man, who had just choked Marcus Webb as though he were nothing but a straw doll, was standing here promising her that he would not enter her room without her permission. He was giving her control, the right to decide, the right to say no, things that Marcus had stripped from her bit by bit over the past 2 years. "Thank you," she whispered, and she was not just thanking him for the room. Dominic nodded. "Bathroom is through that door. There are fresh towels and a change of clothes in the closet. They might be a bit big, but they're clean. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." He turned and walked away. But before he disappeared through the doorway, Olivia called after him. "Dom." He stopped but did not turn around. "Thank you. For everything. For coming when no one else would." Dominic stood still for a moment, his back still facing her. Then he gave a slight nod and vanished into the darkness of the hallway. Olivia closed the door. She looked at the lock for a long moment, then slowly turned the latch. A small click echoed in the silent room, and somehow, that tiny sound carried an enormous weight. For the first time in 2 years, Olivia Harper was in a room with a lock she could control. For the first time in 2 years, no one could burst in at midnight. No one could drag her out of bed. No one could hurt her without her permission. For the first time in 2 years, she felt safe. And that realization, simple yet so profoundly painful, broke the dam she had built around her emotions. Olivia leaned her back against the door and slowly slid to the floor. Tears began to flow, not from fear as they had so many times before, but from relief. She cried for the 2 years of hell that had just ended. She cried for the girl she had been before she met Marcus. She cried for a stranger who had driven through the night to save her because of a text message sent to the wrong number. And somewhere in this cold penthouse, she knew that her life would never be the same again. The first light of morning crept through the thin curtains, waking Olivia from a dreamless sleep. She lay still for a moment, eyes fixed on the unfamiliar ceiling, trying to remember where she was. Then the memories of the previous night crashed over her like a wave, bringing the smell of blood, the sound of gunfire, and the cold gray eyes of the man who had saved her. Her body ached as she slowly sat up. Her cracked ribs protested with every movement, and her face felt tight from the bruises and swelling. But she was alive. She was still breathing. And last night had not been her final night as she had feared. Olivia stepped out of bed and looked around the room in the daylight. Everything remained as luxurious and cold as the night before, but somehow the sunlight made the space feel a little less frightening. She found the clothes Dominic had mentioned, a white button-down shirt and gray jogger pants, both too large for her small frame but clean and comfortable. She changed, washed her face in the bathroom with expensive toiletries she dared not look at the price of, and slowly unlocked her door. The hallway was as silent as the night before. Olivia walked softly across the marble floor, feeling like an intruder in someone else's castle. When she reached the living room, she stopped at the threshold. Dominic stood before the massive glass wall, his back to her, gazing out at Chicago awakening beneath the dawn. In his hand was a cup of coffee, but from the way he held it, motionless and forgotten, Olivia knew it had long gone cold. The early morning light fell across his face as he stood at an angle, and Olivia saw what the darkness of the previous night had concealed. Faint lines around the corners of his eyes, not from age, but from too many sleepless nights. The taut tendons in his neck, as though he carried an invisible weight upon his shoulders. And his gray eyes, when the light caught them, looked emptier than any eyes she had ever seen. This was a man exhausted to the bone, Olivia realized. Not the exhaustion of a single sleepless night, but the kind that accumulates over years, the kind that burrows into the soul and cannot be healed by rest. "You didn't sleep?" Olivia spoke, her voice still hoarse from just waking. Dominic did not flinch. Perhaps he had known she was standing there all along, with the instincts of a predator always alert to every movement around him. He turned to look at her, and Olivia noticed he still wore the same suit from the night before, having only removed the jacket and loosened his tie. "I haven't slept properly in 15 years, he replied, his voice flat as though speaking of the weather rather than admitting to 15 years of insomnia. Then he gestured toward the nearby dining table. "There's breakfast. Rachel had it delivered this morning. You should eat something." Olivia walked to the table and found a breakfast spread she had only ever seen in movies about the wealthy. Croissants, fresh fruit, eggs sunny side up, crispy bacon, freshly squeezed orange juice, and a pot of steaming hot coffee. She sat down and began to eat, not because she was hungry but because she did not know what else to do. Dominic remained standing by the window, but he had turned to watch her. Silence stretched between them, not exactly uncomfortable but not easy either. Finally, Olivia set down her croissant and looked up. "You probably want to know who I am," she said. "Why some random woman texted your number in the middle of the night begging for help." Dominic tilted his head slightly but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Olivia drew a deep breath. "My name is Olivia Harper. I'm 27. I'm an elementary school teacher at Lincoln Elementary. Or at least I was until Marcus made me quit 6 months ago. He said I was spending too much time with the kids and not enough time with him." She laughed, but it was a bitter laugh devoid of any joy. "I met Marcus 2 years ago at a charity event. He was charming, successful, handsome, a lawyer at one of the biggest firms in Chicago. He said all the right things, did all the right things. My friend said I was lucky. My mom, before her Alzheimer's got bad, said he seemed like a good man." She paused, eyes dropping to the plate of food. "The first time he hit me was 6 months into the relationship. He apologized for hours afterward, cried, said it would never happen again, and I believed him." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "But it did happen again, and again, and again. Each time he apologized. Each time he promised to change. Each time I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because admitting the truth meant admitting that I had wasted 2 years of my life on a monster. Because leaving seemed scarier than staying." She looked up at Dominic, her green eyes brimming with tears but refusing to let them fall. "He said he loved me, and I believed him." Dominic set his cold cup of coffee on the table and stepped closer. He did not sit down, but he stood close enough for Olivia to see the expression on his face, and what she saw was not the judgment or pity she had feared. It was understanding. "That's not your fault," Dominic said, his voice low and solid. "Men like him know how to manipulate. They know how to make you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one who needs to try harder, love more, forgive faster. They break you down piece by piece until you forget who you were before them." He paused, and when he spoke again, something painful flickered through his gray eyes. "Someone I loved once believed the same lies. She stayed because she thought he would change. She stayed because she was scared. She stayed until it was too late." Olivia looked at him, and in that moment, she understood. The woman he had failed to save. That was why he came when she called. That was why he had not slept in 15 years. "Your sister?" she asked softly. Dominic did not answer. He did not need to. His silence said everything. 3 days passed in the penthouse like a strange dream Olivia was not sure she wanted to wake from. Dominic was mostly absent during the day, disappearing behind closed doors into the room he called his office. But he always appeared at dinner time to sit with her, asking how she felt, whether her wounds were healing, whether she needed anything. Their conversations were brief and cautious, like two strangers trying to understand each other without wanting to cross invisible boundaries. Olivia spent most of her time reading in the penthouse's small library, gazing at Chicago from above, and trying not to think about Marcus or the uncertain future awaiting her. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Olivia was walking from her bedroom to the living room when she heard low voices drifting from Dominic's office. The door was slightly ajar, and instinctive curiosity made her stop rather than continue walking. Through the gap, she saw Dominic seated behind a massive oak desk, and before him stood 3 men. They wore black suits, stood straight as soldiers awaiting orders, and the way they spoke to Dominic, heads bowed in deference, calling him boss, made the blood in Olivia's veins turn cold. "Volkov is moving cargo through the southern port. If we act tonight, we can intercept the shipment and send them a clear message," one of the men said. Dominic nodded slowly, his finger tapping lightly on the desk. "How many of their people?" "About 15, armed. Prepare 20 of ours. I want this done before midnight. No witnesses, no traces." Olivia stepped back, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The pieces began falling into place in her mind like heavy stones. This lavish penthouse, the men bowing their heads and calling him boss, the way Marcus had trembled like a child when facing him, the way he spoke of making people disappear without anyone finding the body. Dominic Castellano was not a wealthy businessman as she had tried to convince herself to believe. He was a mafia boss. She was living in the house of a criminal. Olivia turned, intending to run back to her room, gather her things, and find a way out of here as quickly as possible. But the moment she turned, she collided with a solid wall. No, not a wall. Dominic's chest. He had been standing right behind her the whole time, silent as a ghost, his gray eyes looking down at her with an unreadable expression. "How much did you hear?" he asked, his voice even and calm. Olivia stepped back, her spine pressing against the hallway wall. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears, and her legs trembled as though they might give way. You're... She could not finish the sentence. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. Not a sigh of anger or threat, but the sigh of someone exhausted from wearing a mask for too long. "Yes," he said simply. "I am exactly what you think I am." Olivia swallowed hard. Mafia. The word escaped her lips like an accusation, but Dominic did not wince or try to deny it. He simply nodded. "I run the Castellano family. We control most of the organized crime in Chicago. Drugs, weapons, money laundering, protection rackets." He listed his crimes as though reading a shopping list. "I've killed people, Olivia. Not with my own hands every time, but I've ordered deaths. I've destroyed lives. I've done things that would make you sick to your stomach." Olivia stood there, back against the wall, looking at the man who had saved her life as though seeing him for the first time. Fear. She should feel fear. She should run out of here immediately, call the police, do anything to escape this man. But when she looked into Dominic's gray eyes, she did not see the monster he had just described. She saw exhaustion. She saw pain. She saw a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why not just lie? Why not pretend to be someone else?" "Because you deserve the truth," Dominic replied, "and because I'm tired of pretending." Silence stretched between them. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat gradually slowing, the initial panic subsiding as reason began to return. This man was a criminal. This man had killed people. But this man was also the one who had driven through the night to save a stranger because of a text message sent to the wrong number. "You saved me." She finally spoke, her voice steadier than she expected. "Bad men don't do that." Dominic looked at her, and in that moment, the cold mask on his face cracked. Just slightly, but enough for Olivia to glimpse what lay beneath. "Maybe I'm not trying to save you," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm trying to save myself." They stood there, in the cold hallway of the penthouse, looking at each other as though gazing into a mirror, not as rescuer and rescued, not as mafia boss and domestic violence victim, but as two shattered souls drifting through a world full of darkness, who had somehow found each other in the night. That night, the nightmare arrived like an uninvited guest. Olivia was sinking into restless sleep when the darkness began to twist, transforming into shapes all too hauntingly familiar. Her old apartment materialized before her eyes, with walls that had witnessed far too many tears and far too much blood. Marcus stood there, his face contorted with rage, a gun in his hand aimed at her. "You think you can run from me?" he snarled, stepping closer, closer still. "You belong to me, Olivia. You will always belong to me." She tried to run, but her feet seemed nailed to the floor. She tried to scream, but her throat felt strangled shut. Marcus advanced, his hand reaching out to seize her hair, yanking her head back. She could feel his breath reeking of alcohol against her face, could see the madness blazing in those bloodshot eyes. "No one will save you. No one cares about you. You're nothing without me." And then the gunshot. Olivia jolted awake, her scream tearing through the silence of the night. "Marcus, no, please," she cried out, eyes wide open yet seeing nothing, still trapped in the limbo between nightmare and reality. Sweat soaked through her nightclothes, her heart pounding wildly, as though trying to burst from her chest. It took several seconds before she realized where she was. Dominic's penthouse, Chicago. Safe. She was safe. Olivia hugged her knees, struggling to control her ragged breathing. Tears streamed down her cheeks beyond her control, and her body trembled as though she could still feel Marcus's hand gripping her hair. Outside the bedroom door, Dominic stood motionless in the darkness of the hallway. He had heard the scream from his room at the other end of the penthouse and had arrived in seconds. But now he stood before the closed door with his hand raised halfway, uncertain whether he should knock. He could hear the choked sobs within, the gasping breaths of someone fighting to escape a panic attack. Every instinct in him screamed to burst through, to protect her, to do something. But he had made a promise. He had said no one would enter her room without her permission, including himself. And Dominic Castellano, despite being a man who had committed countless crimes, was someone who kept his word. He stood there, his forehead pressed against the cold wooden door, listening to the crying within and feeling more helpless than he had ever felt before. He could kill a man with his bare hands. He could dismantle an entire criminal empire in a single night. But he could do nothing to chase away the nightmares tormenting the woman on the other side of this door. Then the door suddenly opened. Olivia stood there, her brown hair disheveled, her green eyes red and swollen from crying, her face pale as a sheet of white paper. She saw Dominic standing right outside her room and showed no surprise, as though she had known he would be here, as though she had sensed his presence even within the nightmare. "Can you stay?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. "I don't want to be alone." Dominic said nothing. He simply nodded and stepped into the room when she moved back to make space. He did not approach the bed. Instead, he pulled the armchair from the corner of the room and placed it beside the window, several steps from the bed, close enough for her to know he was there, but far enough that she would not feel threatened. Olivia climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and lay facing Dominic. She said nothing. He said nothing. They simply existed there, in the room bathed in the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, two lonely souls sharing the same silent space. Dominic gazed out the window, where Chicago still flickered with lights that never slept. Occasionally, he glanced toward the bed and saw Olivia still awake, watching him as though he were the only lifeboat in the storm raging through her mind. Hour after hour, they remained like that. No words, no touch, only each other's presence, and somehow, that was enough. The sky outside the window began shifting from black to gray, then to pale pink as dawn crept between the high rises of Chicago. Olivia had not fallen back asleep, and Dominic had not closed his eyes for a moment, but she was no longer trembling, and her eyes had dried. Before the first rays of sunlight touched the glass, Olivia spoke, her voice small and fragile in the stillness of early morning. "This is the first time in 2 years I feel like someone actually wants to protect me." Dominic did not turn to look at her. He did not answer with words, but in the fading darkness, his hand slowly clenched into a fist on the armrest. It was not a gesture of anger. It was a silent promise, an unspoken vow, that he would protect her, that he would not let anyone hurt her again, that this time he would not arrive too late as he once had for Sophia. This time, he would be here, no matter the cost. 1 week after that nightmare, Olivia stood before the living room window and looked out at Chicago bathed in golden afternoon sunlight. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, shifting from deep purple to yellow-green, and her cracked ribs hurt far less thanks to the medication Dr. Rachel Chen had prescribed. But there was another pain gnawing at her from within, a longing that no medicine could heal. "I want to visit my mom," she said when she heard Dominic's footsteps behind her. "It's been almost 2 weeks. She might be worried. If she remembers me at all." Dominic stopped beside her, his gray eyes looking in the same direction. He said nothing for a moment, as though weighing something. Then he nodded. "I'll take you there." Olivia turned to look at him with surprise. "You don't have to. I can take a cab." "I know I don't have to," Dominic replied, his voice calm as always. "But I want to." Half an hour later, the black Mercedes pulled up in front of Sunrise Care Home, a 3-story building with cream-colored walls and a neatly trimmed garden in front. Olivia sat in the car for a moment, looking through the window at the building where her mother had lived for the past 2 years. Ever since Alzheimer's had made it impossible for her to care for herself, Dominic did not rush her. He simply sat there, waiting, until Olivia drew a deep breath and opened the car door. They entered the building together, Olivia leading the way through the clean hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant, past landscape paintings hung on the walls. The nurses nodded in greeting as she passed, their curious eyes glancing toward the tall man in the expensive suit, walking beside her. Linda Harper's room was at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor, a small room flooded with light from a window overlooking the garden. When Olivia pushed open the door and stepped inside, she saw her mother sitting in an armchair by the window, her silver hair neatly combed, her green eyes identical to Olivia's gazing outside with a dreamy expression. "Mom?" Olivia called softly, her heart clenching with fear. There were days when her mother recognized no one, remembered nothing, simply sat staring into empty space with vacant eyes. But today, when Linda Harper turned and saw her daughter, her eyes lit up with clear recognition. "Olivia? Baby, is that you?" Olivia nearly ran to her mother's side, kneeling beside the chair and taking her wrinkled hand. "Yes, Mom. It's me. I'm here." Linda smiled, her trembling hand stroking her daughter's hair. But then that smile faded when she saw the bruises on Olivia's face, faded but still visible in the daylight. "Who hurt you, baby?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry and anger. Who did this to my little girl? Olivia felt her throat tighten. She did not want to lie to her mother, but she did not want her to worry either. It's nothing, Mom. I'm okay now. I'm safe. Linda looked at her daughter with eyes sharper than one might expect from an Alzheimer's patient. Then her gaze shifted to the man standing silently at the doorway, and she tilted her head. And who is this? She asked, a hint of mischief passing through her voice. Your new boyfriend? Olivia felt her cheeks flush with heat. Mom, he's not. We're not. She stammered without finding words, and when she glanced at Dominic, she saw him standing still as a statue, his face expressionless, but something in those gray eyes she could not read. Linda beckoned Dominic closer, and he stepped forward, stopping beside the bed with a respect Olivia had never seen him show anyone else. Linda looked up at him, her green eyes studying his face with surprising intensity. You look dangerous, she said bluntly without preamble, like someone who has seen and done terrible things. Dominic did not deny it. He simply stood there, enduring her scrutiny without flinching. Linda was silent for a moment. Then she reached out and took Dominic's hand. Her wrinkled hand looked small in his palm, but her grip was unexpectedly firm. But your eyes aren't evil, she said, her voice gentler now. I've seen evil. I saw it in the eyes of the man who hurt my daughter before. You're not like him. Then she squeezed his hand tighter and looked directly into his eyes. Promise me you won't make my daughter cry. Dominic looked into Linda Harper's green eyes identical to her daughter's, and he saw in them a mother trying to protect her child even as illness stole her memories day by day. I promise, ma'am, he said, his voice low and solid. They stayed another hour, listening to Linda tell stories from the past that she still remembered, looking at old photographs Olivia had brought on previous visits. Then when she began to tire and drift into sleep, Olivia kissed her mother's forehead and left with Dominic. On the drive back to the penthouse, Olivia sat in silence for a long while, watching the Chicago streets glide past outside the window. Then she turned to look at Dominic. Why did you promise her? She asked. You barely know me. You don't owe my mother anything. Why did you promise? Dominic did not take his eyes from the road, but his face changed, becoming subtly softer. Because I once promised my sister I'd protect her, he said, his voice dropping low as though he were pulling each word from somewhere deep within his chest. I failed. He paused, drawing a deep breath. This time, I won't. Time did not pass in the penthouse. It was stolen. The following 2 weeks felt like a held breath, a suspended reality severed from the brutal world below. The cold glass fortress atop Chicago didn't just change. It thawed. Laughter, conversation, the smell of home-cooked food instead of orders from 5-star restaurants, the presence of another person in a space where Dominic had lived alone for 15 years. Dinner became their unspoken ritual. Every day, no matter how busy Dominic was with his work, he always returned to the penthouse at exactly 7 in the evening to sit at the dining table with Olivia. At first, those dinners were filled with awkward silences and polite questions, like two strangers trying to find common ground. But gradually, the awkwardness melted away and gave way to real conversation. Olivia told him about her students, about little Tommy who cried every morning because he missed his mother, about Sarah with the curly hair and a smile that could melt ice. She spoke of her college years, of dreams of becoming a writer before the realities of life pushed her into teaching, of her mother when she was still healthy and the afternoons the two of them spent baking together in their small kitchen. Dominic listened more than he spoke, but occasionally he shared fragments of his past, about East Los Angeles and the cramped apartment filled with laughter, about his mother and the plates of enchiladas she cooked every Sunday, about Sophia and how she could talk for hours about the books she read. He did not speak of the darkness. He did not speak of the years that followed, but Olivia did not ask, and her silence was a gift he did not know he needed so desperately. In the second week, Olivia discovered that Dominic Castellano, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, had never cooked for himself in his life. You're kidding, she said, her green eyes wide with astonishment when he admitted it. You've never made yourself so much as a sandwich? Dominic shrugged, a gesture almost sheepish that Olivia had never seen from him before. I have people who do that for me. Well, not anymore, Olivia declared. She tried to stand up to head to the kitchen, but a sharp gasp escaped her lips as her hand flew to her injured side. Her face paled, legs buckling slightly. Dominic was at her side in a heartbeat, his arm supporting her weight. Sit, he commanded, though his voice was laced with panic. You're not cooking anything. I can't just sit here, she whispered, catching her breath. But I can teach you. And so, the feared Mafia boss found himself standing in his pristine kitchen, sleeves rolled up, following the instructions of the small woman perched on a bar stool. She told him how to make pasta from scratch, correcting him when he held the knife wrong, laughing softly when he looked terrified of the boiling water. But he persisted in learning, with the same focus he usually reserved for million-dollar deals, only because Olivia's eyes lit up every time he got a step right. In return, Dominic taught Olivia to play chess. They sat across from each other in his study, a walnut chessboard placed between them, and Dominic explained each move with a patience he never showed in his work. Olivia lost constantly in the early games, but she learned quickly, and before long she could make him pause and think before each move. Those moments were so ordinary they bordered on mundane. Cooking, playing chess, watching movies together on the living room sofa. But for both of them, those moments held deeper meaning than anything they had ever experienced. Dominic had lived 15 years in darkness, surrounded by violence and death and cold loneliness, and Olivia had lived 2 years in fear, controlled and abused and isolated from the world. Both had forgotten what the feeling of normal life was like. That night, they were sitting on the sofa watching an old film that Olivia loved. She sat with her feet tucked up on the cushion, wrapped in a thin blanket, her eyes fixed on the screen. Dominic sat beside her, closer than on previous nights, their shoulders nearly touching. Then, at some moment, when both reached for the bowl of popcorn between them, their fingers touched. Just a light touch, fleeting, accidental, but both froze. Olivia felt the warmth from his hand spreading through her skin like an electric current. Dominic felt the softness of her fingers as though he were touching something sacred, and neither pulled away. They sat there, fingers still touching over the popcorn bowl, eyes on the screen but not truly seeing anything. Dominic's heart was beating to a rhythm he had forgotten long ago, a feeling of warmth and fear and hope intertwined that he thought had died with Sophia 15 years before. And Olivia realized she was no longer looking at Dominic as the man who had saved her life. She was looking at him as a man. Marcus Webb did not leave Chicago as he had been ordered. Instead, he hid in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, where no one bothered to ask for a name or identification. His broken wrist had been set in a cast at a private clinic he paid cash to avoid leaving any trace. And every night he lay on the filthy bed, staring up at the yellowed ceiling and brooding over the humiliation he had endured. 2 weeks ago, he had been a successful lawyer with a luxurious apartment and a beautiful woman under his control. Now he was a fugitive, living in fear and fury, with a cast on his wrist as a constant reminder of the night he had been reduced to a worm beneath the heel of a stranger. And his woman, his property, was now in that man's hands. Marcus could not accept it. He began following Olivia from a distance, carefully maintaining space, and changing rental cars every day to avoid detection. He saw her coming and going from the tallest building in Chicago, a building he knew belonged to one of the most powerful men in the city. He watched the black Mercedes take her to the nursing home to visit her mother, and the man accompanying her was the same one who had nearly killed him that night. Dominic Castellano. That name made Marcus both tremble with fear and boil with rage. He had heard rumors about this man among lawyers, whispered stories about the coldest mafia boss in Chicago, the one who ran an entire criminal empire from the penthouse high above. He had not recognized him that night, when he had been too drunk and too angry to think clearly. But now he knew, and he also knew that he alone could never touch Castellano or Olivia. He needed allies. He needed someone powerful enough to stand against the mafia boss who was stealing his woman. And in the Chicago underworld, only one force could counterbalance the Castellano family, the Volkov family. The Russian mafia had held a grudge against Dominic Castellano for years, ever since Castellano expanded his territory and swallowed a significant portion of their operations on the South Shore. Viktor Volkov, the head of the family, was a ruthless man with silver hair and blue eyes cold as Siberian ice, who had sworn to reclaim what Castellano had taken. And when Marcus Webb appeared at his door with information about Dominic Castellano's newest weakness, Victor listened with undisguised interest. "Who is she?" Victor asked, his finger tapping lightly on the oak desk in his office. Why would Castellano care about some unknown elementary school teacher? Marcus told him everything. About the night Castellano burst into his apartment, about the way the mafia boss looked at Olivia, protecting her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, about how she was living in his penthouse, dining with him every evening, visiting her mother with him like a real couple. She is his weakness, Marcus concluded, his eyes bright with hatred. For the first time in 15 years, Dominic Castellano has something to lose. Victor smiled, the smile of a wolf who had just caught the scent of wounded prey. And what do you want in exchange for this information, lawyer? Protection. And Olivia. When you take down Castellano, I want her returned to me. Victor nodded slowly. Agreed. We have a deal. That night, Olivia was sitting reading in the living room when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and the blood in her veins turned to ice when she saw Marcus's number appear. She had thought he had left the city. She had thought the nightmare was over. But the message appeared on the screen like a bucket of cold water thrown over the peaceful moment she had been enjoying. You think you're safe with your new boyfriend? I know who he is, Olivia. I know where you live. And I have friends now. Powerful friends who want to see Castellano burn. I'll destroy everything he loves, everything he has, and when there's nothing left, I'll come for you. You belong to me. You will always belong to me. Olivia dropped her book, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the phone. She heard Dominic's footsteps behind her and turned around, her face white as paper. What's wrong? Dominic asked, striding quickly to her side when he saw the fear in her eyes. Olivia could not form words. She simply handed him the phone, letting him read the message displayed on the screen. Dominic read. His face did not change, but something in his gray eyes shifted, darkening like the sky before a storm, like the deep sea before a tsunami strikes. This was not the anger Olivia had seen in Marcus, the kind of anger that exploded and lost control. This was something colder, more dangerous, a rage perfectly contained beneath the icy surface, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. He set the phone on the table and looked at Olivia, one hand placed on her shoulder to reassure her. He chose the wrong person to threaten, Dominic said, his voice low and solid as a final verdict, and he's about to learn why. It took only 24 hours for Dominic to find Marcus Webb. When he ruled an entire criminal empire with hundreds of eyes and ears scattered across Chicago, no one could stay hidden for long in his city. The Riverside Motel was a pretty name for a cheap rundown dump on the far southern edge of town, a place the police rarely bothered to visit, and where fugitives could rent a room with cash and no questions asked. Marcus was in room 17 on the second floor at the end of the corridor. Dominic came alone. He did not need his men for this. This was personal, and he wanted to look the man who dared to threaten Olivia straight in the eyes when he finished it. The door to room 17 was unlocked, as if fate itself were inviting him inside. Dominic pushed it open and stepped into a room heavy with the stench of cigarettes and cheap alcohol. The fluorescent light on the ceiling flickered weakly like something dying. Marcus sat on the bed with a laptop open in front of him. When he looked up and saw who stood in the doorway, every trace of blood drained from his face in a single instant. He jumped to his feet, eyes darting wildly for an escape, but Dominic had already closed the door behind him and moved calmly into the center of the room, with the slow certainty of a predator who knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Dominic Castellano, Marcus stammered, his trembling hand lifting as if it could somehow stop a bullet. Listen, I can explain. The text message. It was just, I was angry. I did not mean it. Shut up. Dominic cut him off. His voice was so cold the air itself seemed to freeze. He walked to the still open laptop on the bed and looked down at the screen. What he saw made his jaw clench so tightly it felt as though his teeth might shatter. Emails. Dozens of exchanged messages between Marcus Webb and an address Dominic recognized instantly. Volkov. Floor plans of his building, Olivia's movement schedule, details of the penthouse security system, the names and home addresses of his closest people. Marcus Webb had not been making empty threats. He had been selling information to Dominic's enemy. He had been opening the gates for the Russian wolves to pour into his territory. He had been placing Olivia directly in the crosshairs of men who would not hesitate to use her as a hostage or worse. You sold me to the Volkovs, Dominic said. His voice rumbled low like distant thunder before a storm. This is not just about Olivia anymore. This is war. Marcus backed up until his spine struck the wall, and there was nowhere left to retreat. They came to me first. I did not have a choice. You were going to kill me anyway. Dominic drew his gun from its holster and aimed it straight at Marcus's forehead. The sharp click of the safety being released echoed through the silent room like a death bell. Marcus collapsed to his knees, both hands pressed together as if in prayer. Please, please do not kill me. I will do anything. I will disappear. You will never see me again. Dominic looked down at the man kneeling before him and felt a deep and bitter disgust rise in his chest. Not because Marcus was weak and begging for his life, but because this was the man who had beaten Olivia, the man who had kept her living in fear for 2 years, the man who had made her believe she was unworthy of love. And now he was here, crying, begging, not from remorse for what he had done, but from fear of dying. Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One bullet and Marcus Webb would vanish from this world forever. He would never again be able to threaten Olivia or anyone else. Dominic had killed before, many times. His conscience had long since hardened. One more body would change nothing. But then he thought of Olivia. He thought of her green eyes when she asked if bad people could ever do good things. He thought of the way she had looked at him during the past weeks. Not with fear, not with judgment, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. As if she believed he could be better than the man he himself believed he was. He thought of the promise he had made to Linda, that he would never make her daughter cry. If he killed Marcus tonight, he would return to the penthouse with blood on his hands, and even if Olivia never knew, he would know, and that would change the way he looked into her eyes. "I will not kill you," Dominic said. Marcus lifted his face with a pitiful spark of hope. "Not because you deserve to live. Not because I have forgiven you for what you did to Olivia, or for selling me to the Volkovs." Dominic bent down, bringing his face so close that Marcus could see the storm raging inside his gray eyes. "But because there is someone I do not want to disappoint." Dominic straightened and took out his phone. He dialed a number already saved and waited. "Agent Sterling, this is Dominic Castellano. I have a gift for you." 20 minutes later, Marcus Webb was led out of the motel in handcuffs by 4 FBI agents wearing black jackets. Dominic stood in the shadows, watching coldly as Marcus was shoved into the vehicle. Hours earlier, Dominic had already sent Agent Morrison a thick file of evidence, proof of domestic abuse, including photographs of Olivia's injuries, 5 years of tax evasion records from Marcus's law firm, and most important of all, the emails proving Marcus's connection to the Volkov criminal organization. Enough charges to make Marcus Webb rot in federal prison for no less than 20 years. No bail. No brilliant lawyer could save him. This was how Dominic Castellano took revenge when he chose not to kill. More painful than death. Longer than any bullet could ever be. When the FBI vehicle disappeared into the night, Dominic turned and walked toward the waiting Mercedes. Another war lay ahead, one with Viktor Volkov and the Russian Mafia empire. But tonight, he had done the right thing. And for the first time in 15 years, it truly meant something to him. Viktor Volkov was not a man who accepted defeat in silence. Just 3 days after Marcus Webb was arrested by the FBI, the Russian mob boss ordered retaliation. If he could not obtain information from the inside trader, he would send a far more direct message to Dominic Castellano through blood and bullets. The ambush took place in the evening as Dominic was on his way back to the penthouse after a meeting with contacts on the south side. 2 black SUVs blocked the front of his Mercedes at a deserted intersection. Before the driver could react, gunfire erupted like fireworks from hell. Vincent, who always sat in the front passenger seat, pulled Dominic down to the car floor in an instant. Even so, one bullet shattered through the window and tore a long line across the left shoulder of the boss. The shootout lasted less than 3 minutes before Castellano's reinforcements arrived and pushed the attackers back. 2 of Dominic's men were wounded. One of Volkov's men died on the spot. The Mercedes was riddled with holes like a hive, but Dominic was alive, and in their world, that was all that mattered. Olivia was standing in the living room when the elevator doors opened and Dominic stepped into the penthouse. She turned with a smile, ready to greet him as she did every night. That smile froze when she saw him. Dominic's white shirt was soaked with blood from his left shoulder down to his waist. His face was pale. His lips were tightly pressed together in pain. Vincent was supporting him as if he might collapse at any moment. "Oh my God," Olivia gasped as she rushed to his side, trembling fingers touching the blood on his shirt. "What happened? Are you okay? We need to call an ambulance." "No ambulance," Dominic said through clenched teeth. "Rachel is on her way, but you are bleeding. You need a hospital." I said no. His voice cut off all further argument. Olivia stepped back as if she had been struck. Vincent helped Dominic sit on the sofa and began cutting away the shirt to expose the wound. The gash was deep and long, but the bullet had only grazed him instead of lodging inside. Luck, or perhaps Vincent's skill in pulling him down at the exact right moment. Dr. Rachel Chen arrived 15 minutes later and treated the wound with her usual clinical precision. Olivia stood in the corner of the room, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the scene grow darker in her eyes. Blood, guns, wounds. This was not the first time she had seen violence, but it was the first time she truly understood that it would never end. Not as long as she stayed beside Dominic. When Rachel left and Vincent withdrew into another room, Olivia finally spoke. Her voice shook, but steel lived inside it. "Is this your world, Dom? Blood and violence every day." Dominic lifted his gaze to her. The fresh bandage on his shoulder still throbbed. He saw fear in her eyes, horror, and something that felt like disappointment. It hurt more than any bullet. This is the world I had to build to survive, he said wearily. I never pretended to be someone else, Olivia. You always knew who I was. I knew you were dangerous. I did not know I would have to watch you bleed on the couch every other night. Her voice rose as tears streamed down her face. I did not know I would have to wonder every time you walk out that door whether you will come back alive. This is who I am, Dominic said. Each word fell between them like a heavy stone. This is all I know how to be. Olivia shook her head as tears flowed freely. I do not know if I can live in this world, Dom. I escaped one nightmare only to walk straight into another. The violence, the fear, always looking over my shoulder. Always wondering when the next attack will come. She stopped, her voice breaking. I thought I had found something real with you. But how can anything real survive in a world made of blood? Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Dominic looked at her, and something fractured in his gray eyes, but his face remained as cold as stone. Then leave, he said. His voice was empty of emotion, even as his heart shattered inside. The door is always open, Olivia. I told you that from the beginning. You are not a prisoner here. Olivia stared at him, waiting for more. Waiting for him to ask her to stay, to promise he would change, to say he needed her. But Dominic said nothing. He only sat there, looking at her with hollow eyes, as if he had accepted this long before it ever happened. 20 minutes later, Olivia walked out of the penthouse with a small bag containing a few clothes she had brought with her when she first arrived. She did not look back. She could not. Dominic stood by the window, watching the taxi that carried her away vanish into the black night of Chicago. Vincent stood behind him in silence for a long moment before speaking. Boss, do you want me to have someone follow her for protection? Let her go, Vincent, Dominic replied hoarsely. She deserves a normal life, something I can never give her. He remained there for a long time, staring at the city lights flickering below, and for the first time in 15 years, the penthouse truly felt empty. 7 days, 168 hours of silence. That was how long it took for the normal life Olivia craved to turn into a cage. She rented a small apartment on the west side, inside an ordinary building. But the silence here didn't bring peace. It brought ghosts. The apartment had only one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a window that looked out onto an unremarkable alley. It was nothing like the luxurious penthouse at the top of the city. And that was exactly what she needed. Or at least, that was what she kept telling herself. She tried to live normally. She woke up every morning, brewed coffee, read the news, and called the nursing home to check on her mother. She began searching for a new job, sending applications to elementary schools in the area, hoping she could return to the small students she loved. She went grocery shopping, cooked meals for one, and watched old movies alone on a cheap sofa. On the surface, her life was returning to normal, but every night, when darkness fell and the apartment sank into silence, Olivia found herself sitting on the bed with her phone in her hands, staring at the dark screen. She did not know what she was waiting for. A call, a message, anything that would show Dominic was still thinking of her, still cared, still wanted her to come back, but the screen remained black. No call, no message. Nothing at all except a silence that echoed more painfully than any farewell. She had been the one who left. She had been the one who chose to walk away. Then why did she feel as if she were the one abandoned? Why did this ordinary apartment feel emptier than the nights she had been imprisoned by Marcus? Why, every time she closed her eyes, was it not nightmares of Marcus that appeared, but the gray eyes of Dominic, when he said, "Then leave." On the other side of the city, at the top of the tallest building in Chicago, Dominic Castellano stood before the glass wall, just as he did every night since Olivia left. The penthouse had returned to its familiar silence. No laughter, no scent of food from the kitchen, no one sitting across from him at the chessboard. Everything was the same as before she arrived. And somehow, the emptiness now felt deeper than it ever had. He had been accustomed to solitude for 15 years. He had believed he needed no one, but only a few short weeks with Olivia had destroyed every wall he had built. Now he stood amid the ruins, with no idea what to do next. Vincent entered the room and set a glass of whiskey on the table beside Dominic. The middle-aged man studied his boss for a long moment before speaking. "You should call her, boss." Dominic did not turn around. "She is safer away from me." "Is she? Or are you just telling yourself that so you do not have to face what you really feel?" Dominic turned to Vincent with the icy stare that had made countless enemies tremble. But Vincent had followed him for 15 years, and he did not move. "You have never been like this before," Vincent continued calmly. "I have seen you after battles. I have seen you after betrayals. I have seen you after funerals. But I have never seen you like this, Broken. I am not broken. You stand at that window every night looking at a city you no longer see because you are searching for her. Silence. Dominic offered no denial because there was nothing to deny. Vincent sighed and left, leaving his boss alone with the darkness and the thoughts no one could ease. The war with Volkov escalated over the following days. Dominic threw himself into it with a savagery that even his own men feared. He led raids into Russian Mafia territory, destroyed warehouses, seized ground, and delivered messages through blood and fire. He no longer remained in the shadows, issuing commands as before. He was on the front lines, as if searching for death or redemption. He no longer knew which, but each time violence erupted, each time blood spilled, he saw Olivia's eyes, green eyes filled with fear and disappointment on the night she left. Is this your world? Blood and violence? The question haunted him like a ghost. It echoed in his mind each time he pulled a trigger, each time he gave an order to attack, each time he saw his own reflection in the terrified eyes of his enemies. And he hated himself. He hated himself for letting her go. He hated himself for not running after her. He hated himself for building a world where she could not survive. He hated himself for spending 15 years turning into a monster. And now that someone had finally seen the man inside, he had pushed her away out of fear that the monster would devour her too. That night, after a blood-soaked raid on one of Volkov's casinos, Dominic sat alone in his office, staring down at his blood-stained hands. And for the first time since the night Sophia died, he felt tears burn behind his eyes. Not for what he had done, but for what he had lost. Viktor Volkov was a patient man, and his patience was finally rewarded. As Dominic Castellano launched relentless assaults on his empire, destroying warehouses and casinos, Viktor did not rush to retaliate in kind. Instead, he waited, he observed. He searched for his enemy's true weakness. Marcus Webb had been arrested before he could deliver everything, but he had revealed one crucial piece of information. Dominic Castellano had a woman, and finding her was only a matter of time. Olivia was walking back to her apartment after visiting her mother at Sunrise Care Home when it happened. Twilight had already fallen, and the street was quieter than usual for a late November afternoon. She was thinking about her mother, about how the woman had not recognized her today, about the dull ache that returned each time she looked into the hollow eyes of the woman who had once been her entire world. She was thinking about Dominic, as she always did, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether he thought of her as she thought of him. She did not notice the black van slowing behind her until it was too late. 2 men leapt from the rear doors, moving with the speed and precision of professionals. One hand clamped onto her arm, the other covered her mouth before she could scream. But Olivia was no longer the weak woman she had been 2 years ago. 2 months of living beside Dominic, witnessing strength and endurance, had changed her in ways she did not understand until this very moment. She did not freeze in fear. She fought. Olivia bit down on the hand covering her mouth. She bit deep until she tasted blood on her tongue. The attacker shouted and released his grip. In that instant, she screamed, "Help! Somebody help me!" She kicked the shin of the man holding her arm. She clawed at his face with her nails. She thrashed like a wild animal fighting for its life. One of the attackers was forced back, blood streaking from the scratches on his cheek. Olivia turned and ran, heart hammering wildly, feet stumbling on the sidewalk. Her hand fumbled for the phone in her pocket. Her fingers trembled across the screen. She did not think. Instinct guided her. And the number she dialed was not the police. "Dom, help." She managed only those 3 words before one of the attackers caught up, ripped the phone from her hand and shoved it into his pocket with a sneer. She saw his face beneath the streetlight, cold, merciless. Then a damp cloth was pressed over her nose. The sharp reek of chemicals flooded her lungs. The world began to spin. The last thing she remembered was her body collapsing, rough arms lifting her, and darkness swallowing everything. On the other side of the city, inside the penthouse office, Dominic was in a meeting with Vincent and his contacts regarding the war with Volkov when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His heart missed a beat when he saw Olivia's name. She had not called him even once since she left. He answered with a trembling hand. And what he heard froze his blood solid. "Dom, help." Olivia's voice, panicked and desperate, cut off mid-sentence. Screams, sounds of struggle, the growl of an unfamiliar male voice speaking Russian. Then the phone hit the ground and the line went dead. Dominic shot to his feet. His chair crashed backward onto the floor. Everyone in the room froze at the sight of the boss's face. It was no longer the cold, controlled expression they knew. It was the face of a man watching hell open before his eyes. 15 years earlier, he had received a call like this from Sophia. He had driven through the night. He had prayed to a God he no longer believed in. He had promised everything in exchange for arriving in time. But he had not arrived in time. He had arrived to see a black body bag on the sidewalk. "Not again," he whispered, his voice like wind cutting through clenched teeth. "Not again, not again." The final shout thundered through the office as Dominic moved with a speed and decisiveness that only desperation could produce. "Vincent, track her phone right now," he ordered as he ran for the door. "Call everyone. Everyone. I want all armed men ready in 15 minutes. Vincent did not ask questions. There was no need. He had followed Dominic long enough to know when his boss was standing at the edge. "The phone is moving toward the South District," Vincent said, after minutes of frantic typing on the laptop. "The old industrial zone. That is Volkov territory." "Warehouse number 7, Dominic snarled as he checked his weapon. "That is their nest." 20 minutes later, a convoy of 7 black SUVs tore through the streets of Chicago like bullets through the night. Dominic sat in the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle, eyes locked straight ahead, jaw clenched hard enough to shatter teeth. He was not thinking like a mafia boss planning an assault. He was not calculating losses, strategy, or political consequences. He was thinking only of Olivia, of her green eyes, of her smile when she taught him how to cook pasta, of the way she laughed when he burned the garlic, of the night she sat in the dark after a nightmare and said she felt safe when he was near, of the promise he made to Linda that he would never make her daughter cry. He had failed Sophia. He had arrived 45 minutes late and had lived with that regret for 15 years. He would not fail again. Not with Olivia. Not tonight. "Faster," he ordered the driver. His voice was no longer that of Dominic Castellano, the powerful mafia boss. It was the voice of Daniel Rivera, the brother who lost his sister and never forgave himself. "Drive faster." Warehouse number 7 rose out of the darkness like a sleeping concrete beast, but Dominic knew it was awake inside, and waiting. Dim light leaked through filthy windows, revealing movement within. The trucks parked all around confirmed what he already knew. Olivia was here. He did not wait. He did not plan. He did not calculate losses. Dominic leapt from the vehicle before it had fully stopped and charged straight for the front entrance with his gun raised. His men surged in from every direction like a black tide. Gunfire tore through the night, shouting, shattering glass, bullets slamming into concrete. Dominic moved through the battlefield like a spirit of vengeance, cutting down every obstruction without slowing. A bullet grazed his left thigh. He did not stop. Another grazed his arm, blood soaked through his sleeve. He did not stop. No pain could halt him tonight. Nothing mattered except finding her. He kicked open the door to a rear room, and he saw her. Olivia sat bound to a metal chair, her hands tied behind her back, a cloth gag stuffed into her mouth. Her face was bruised. Her lips were split and bleeding, but her green eyes were wide open and blazing when she saw him standing in the doorway. Viktor Volkov stood behind her with a gun pressed to her head. A cold smile stretched across his aged face. "Castellano, at last. I have been waiting for you." "Put the gun down, Victor," Dominic roared, his weapon aimed straight at the Russian boss's forehead. "Or I will kill you where you stand." Victor laughed. "You shoot me, I shoot her. We both die. Is that what you want?" Silence stretched for a moment that felt like eternity. Then, fast as lightning, Vincent emerged from the rear entrance and fired into Victor's shoulder. The Russian boss collapsed. His gun fell from his hand. Before Victor hit the ground, Dominic was already at Olivia's side. He sliced through the ropes with the knife from his jacket. He stripped away the gag, and he pulled her into his arms as if she might vanish at any second. Olivia trembled against him. Tears streamed down her face. But she was alive. She was breathing. She was still here. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was raw and shaking. Dominic held her tighter, his face buried in her hair. And for the first time in 15 years, he let the tears fall freely. "I will always come," he whispered back. "Always." Viktor Volkov was taken alive and delivered to the FBI along with overwhelming evidence of the Russian Mafia's criminal operations. The Volkov empire fell in a single night, and Dominic Castellano stood in its ruins with the woman he loved in his arms. At the hospital, Dominic remained at Olivia's bedside through the entire night. His own wounds were bandaged, but he refused a private room. He wanted to stay here, beside her, watching her breathe, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, needing to be certain this was not a dream. When Olivia woke the next morning, the first thing she saw was Dominic's gray eyes watching her with something she had never seen in them before: tenderness, vulnerability, love. "I built walls for 15 years, he said, his voice low and trembling. "I thought nothing could break them. Then you sent one message to a wrong number, and everything I built came crashing down." Olivia smiled. She lifted her hand and touched his face. Her fingers traced the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. "Maybe because I was never trying to get in," she whispered. "I only needed help, and you came." "I almost lost you," he said. His voice broke. "Just like I lost Sophia. I do not think I could survive that again." "You did not lose me." She took his hand and placed it over her chest where her heart beat steadily. "I am right here, and I am not going anywhere." Dominic bent down and kissed her. It was their first kiss. Gentle, sweet, filled with unspoken promises. It was the kiss of two broken souls who had finally found each other, of two lonely hearts that had finally found home. 6 months later, Dominic Castellano announced his withdrawal from the underworld. He handed the empire over to Vincent with instructions to transition all operations into legitimate business within 5 years. He no longer wanted to build a kingdom on blood and tears. He wanted to build a life with Olivia, a normal life, one neither of them had ever known. Olivia founded a non-profit organization to help victims of domestic violence. It was funded by Dominic's fortune and guided by her boundless compassion. She wanted to help women like the one she used to be. Women trapped in toxic relationships with no idea how to escape. She wanted to be a voice for the voiceless, a light for those who had lost hope. One spring afternoon, Dominic took Olivia to a cemetery in East Los Angeles. They stood before 2 graves resting side by side. The names carved in stone read Elena Rivera and Sofia Rivera. Dominic knelt. He placed a bouquet of white roses on his sister's grave, and for the first time in 15 years, he spoke to her. "Sophia, I am sorry I arrived too late," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I am sorry I could not save you. But I want you to know, I did not forget my promise. I saved someone, Sophia. I saved her, and I will keep my promise to you every day for the rest of my life." Olivia knelt beside him. She took his hand and rested her head against his shoulder. "Thank you, Sophia," she said to the grave. "Thank you for teaching him to keep his promise. I will take good care of him." They rose and walked away hand in hand beneath the golden afternoon sun. Behind them, the 2 graves rested in peace. And if one listened closely, it almost sounded as if the wind whispered a blessing from those who had passed. One mistakenly sent message, one midnight cry for help, one mafia boss with a shattered heart, and one woman with a bruised soul. That was all it took to change 2 lives forever. Because sometimes, a wrong number leads to the right person. Sometimes, lost souls find each other in the dark. And sometimes, even the hardest hearts can learn how to love again. The wrong number led to the right salvation. And that, my dear friends, is the story of Dominic and Olivia. A story of love, of redemption, and of the power of compassion. This story teaches us that it is never too late to change, never too dark to find light, never too broken to be healed. It reminds us that behind every cold exterior is a story, a pain, a wound that has not yet healed. And sometimes, all a person needs is someone who believes in them, someone who sees the human being beneath the hardened shell. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please remember that you are not alone. Seek help. Speak up. Believe that a better life is waiting ahead. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Click like and share this video so that more people may hear stories with meaning like this one. We truly want to know how this story made you feel. Did it remind you of someone in your life? Did it make you think about the importance of helping others? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We sincerely look forward to hearing what is deepest in your heart. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful and peaceful life each day. Remember that every day is a new chance to do good, to love, and to become the best version of yourself. Thank you so very much. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.